I went to the party telling myself it was harmless. That was the first lie of the evening, and I didn't even bother to make it convincing. The room was already warm with bodies and laughter when I arrived. Music low, enough to invite closeness, lights forgiving enough to blur edges. I took a glass I didn't need and smiled at people whose names I knew just well enough to ask about work. The performance came easily. It always had. I'd learned how to look settled even when I wasn't. I was halfway through a conversation I didn't care about when I felt the shift. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure, like a change in weather. I turned, expecting nothing in particular, and saw my husband standing near the back wall. He wasn't angry. He wasn't searching for me. He wasn't doing anything that would make sense. If you were preparing for confrontation, he had his hands folded loosely in front of him, posture relaxed, eyes steady. He looked like a man who had arrived to witness something already in motion. I didn't wave. He didn't wave back. That silence landed harder than any accusation could have. I tried to recalibrate. I laughed a little louder, leaned in when someone spoke, nodded as if I were deeply engaged. My body knew what to do when the stakes rose. Perform normal, then perform warmer, then perform charming. It was almost automatic. Almost. When his eyes met mine again, I felt something tear, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else could see. It was internal, precise. The split between who I was acting as and who I was being seen as widened until I couldn't bridge it. I told myself he might leave. I told myself he might misunderstand. I told myself anything that would give me time. Someone asked how I knew the man standing too close to me. I said we'd worked together once. That was the second lie. It was smaller than the first, and somehow worse. It wasn't meant to deceive my husband. It was meant to preserve a version of myself that still wanted approval. My husband didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He didn't reach for his phone or scan the room for allies. He simply watched, as if the truth were a process he was allowing to complete itself. That was when I realized the weight of being seen isn't about exposure. It's about recognition. He wasn't discovering who I was. He was recognizing it. The host tapped a glass to get attention. A practical interruption, a shift toward logistics. There was an announcement about scheduling, about a surprise guest who would be joining later, about a small change in how the evening would unfold. Routine authority. Neutral, unemotional. Then my name was said, not with drama, not with emphasis, just as a matter of placement, a clarification about seating, about affiliations, about who was connected to whom. The sentence was simple, but it rearranged the room. The man beside me stepped back without comment. Conversations adjusted. Someone apologized to no one in particular. The lie I'd told had nowhere to land. I didn't look at my husband when it happened. I didn't need to. The control had already shifted, not through punishment, but through alignment. The facts were where they belonged now. I expected embarrassment. I expected a rush of heat, the familiar urge to defend or disappear. What I felt instead was a strange steadiness. The moment didn't belong to me anymore, and that was a relief. When I finally did meet his eyes, there was no triumph there, no satisfaction, just acknowledgement, as if to say, this is the shape of things when they're named. He left before I did. Quietly, no scene, no ultimatum. He took his coat from the back of a chair and nodded once to the host, who nodded back. Professional courtesy between two people who understood boundaries. I stayed long enough to finish my drink. Not because I wanted to, but because leaving immediately would have felt like another performance. Outside, the night was cooler than I expected. I pulled my jacket tighter and stood still, letting the air do its work. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. There was one draft I started and deleted 3 times. I understood then that dignity doesn't always look like repair. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Like accepting a consequence without asking it to soften. I didn't know if my marriage would survive the clarity of that evening. I didn't know if I deserved for it to. What I knew was that the version of me who could hide in plain sight had been gently, firmly retired. Being seen had not destroyed me, but it had ended something I could no longer pretend to be unaware of. And that ending, quiet, unresolved, was the truest thing that happened all night.